Spherical manipulator. To complete this kinematic diagram with more details, let us assign it DH prime rules. Rule number 1. The z-axis must be the axis of rotation for a revolute twisting or the direction of translation for a prismatic joint. To make references easier, let us start number the frame from 0, where the first joint will contain the first axis and will be called frame 0. Frame 0. Blue pen. Blue line sa z-axis. In frame 0, it must be the z sub 0 must be upward. Then see this one is z sub 0. Next is z sub 1. The z sub 1 must be left downward. Z sub 1. Next is z sub 2. Let's proceed to the z sub 2. The z sub 2 must be pointing to the right. Z sub 2. And next is the Z sub 3 in the end effector. In Z sub 3, it is follow the z-axis of the frame before it for the end effector. This one is the end effector, Z sub 3. Next is, let's proceed to the rule number 2. Let us use red ink. X-axis. Rule 2. The x-axis must be perpendicular both to its own z-axis and the z-axis of the frame before it. It should look like this. In the x sub 0 must be pointing to the right. X sub 0. The next is the x sub 1 must be pointing to the right side also. X sub 1. We can see that the x-axis are perpendicular to both its z-axis and the z-axis before at is well. When in x sub 2, it must be pointing it must be pointing upward also. This is upward. X sub 2. Then, in the end effector, also upward. X sub 3. Again, for the end effector, must follow the x-axis of the frame before it. Then x sub 2 and x sub 3 must be also upward. Then let's proceed to the rule 3. After completing the rule number 2, let us move to the rule 3. In rule 3, states that each x-axis must intersect the z-axis of the frame before it. Let's use color black because I don't have green pen. In rule 3, let's verify if intersecting the x-axis of frame 1 to z-axis of frame 0. Frame 1, in frame 2, we can see that the x sub 2 does not intersect with the z-axis. With the frame before it. Instead, let us translate x sub 2 to the frame before it. X sub 2 to the frame before it. This one. The z sub 2 must be moving this one to this one. And to x sub 2. Moving z sub 1 to x sub 2. Then the x sub 2 must be, it will work translation. After translating the x sub 2 with the z sub 2 along the x sub 1, we can say that x sub 2 intersect with the z-axis before, which is z sub 1. For the last DH frame rule, we will need to remember the right-hand rule for the rule number 4. Based on the right-hand rule, this one is the right-hand rule, the thumb must be the z-axis, the index finger must be the x-axis ang index finger, the z-axis must be the thumb, and the y must be, the middle finger must be the y. By following this rule and labeling it appropriately, including the y-axis of the end effector, we can complete the kinematic diagram. It should look like this. Let's use black pen. In y0, this one is the z sub 0. It's pointing upward, then the x pointing to the right. Therefore, the y sub 0 is backward. This one, like this. Y sub 0, like this, backward. Then, in frame number 2, let's know what is y sub 1. In frame number 2, the z-axis is pointing to the left downward, then the x-axis, this one, right? This. Therefore, the y sub 1 must be pointing upward. Y sub 1 pointing upward. Y sub 1. We can see that in this row we move the I forget, in the rule 3 we should move the x sub 2 and and z sub 2 in this one to this, translating. I forgot to write that this must be x z sub 2, like the x sub 1. Then therefore our x sub 2 pointing upward na. I forget to indicate that. Therefore, this one will in here. This one in here. Let's move this one to the let's move this to this. Therefore, the y sub 2 is pointing downward. Left downward. Y sub 2. Y sub 2. Then this one is x sub 2. X sub 2. Then let's proceed to y sub 3. The z sub 3 pointing to the right, the x sub 3 pointing upward. Therefore, the y sub 3 pointing to the left downward. This must be our y sub 3. After completing the DH frame, we will have Juno Kapunod to discuss the next segment of this topic, which is constructing a parametric table.